I think my favorite opening to a movie ever is from The Lion King. As the scene opens up, Scar has caught a little mouse, and just before he devours the helpless creature, he says in his deep and menacing voice, "Life's not fair, is it?" Now, if you have lived for a while, you know that's true. However, we all still want things to be fair, don't we? We want the good guys to win and the bad guys to lose. But the sad reality of this world is it doesn't always work out quite that way. When I was a principal at a Christian school, I had the same line all the time from the students. Whenever they got in trouble, whenever they did bad on a test, whenever they were sent to my office, they always said, "That's not fair." But you know, it was not only the children who cry that sad refrain. We find ourselves often saying or feeling the same thing, don't we? It's not fair when the one who doesn't do as much work as you gets the raise or promotion. It's not fair when you're left all alone with no friends or family. It's not fair when the people you trust the most hurt you. However, whoever said life was fair? The Bible certainly never guarantees fairness in this world. The idea that if we believe in Jesus, everything will come up roses or be wonderful in this world is actually a dangerous theology, because that can crush your faith. We tend to blame God when things don't work out. But that's not fair to God. Jesus said in John chapter 16, verse 33, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation." Our text this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes makes it very clear that most things in this world are not fair. Life's not fair. And if that is the reality, then what do we do when our world crumbles? What do we do when the nights are long and the days are dim? Over the years, I have conducted over 100 funerals. It's never been easy. It's always hard. It's always really gets to me sometimes when I have to do a funeral. But you know, the toughest time I ever had in ministry was the year I had 3 funerals in 3 months from 3 active members of the church. The first one was a 20-year-old girl who died. Then a 19-year-old boy was killed in a car accident. And finally, an 81-year-old woman passed away. I was thinking about that the other day. We know it's not fair when the young, with all the hope and potential they have, die. But you know it's also not fair when the old die either. To this day, none of those deaths make complete sense to me. One of the first things we were told when we became foster parents was that we had no rights to the children, and if we hired an attorney, the children would be removed immediately. Well, after Gypsy and Candy were kidnapped from us twice by their biological parents, and the revolving door of caseworkers desperately trying to send the girls back to their biological parents, in spite of the parents never doing one thing the caseworker asked them to do, and in spite of knowing that it was not a good or safe environment to send the children to, we finally had enough, and we hired an attorney. Well, the attorney quickly filed an injunction preventing children's services from taking the kids out of our care, but the state decided, in a very vindictive fashion, to cut off all assistance they gave us to provide for the foster kids, including money to buy food and clothes and health insurance. So that meant our ability to care for them was reduced. And since they were not our children, we could not get health insurance for them, although we were still responsible to pay any medical bills. Was that fair? Was that fair about us falling deep in debt, trying to care for the needs of those kids? There was a pretrial hearing later on, several years later, where the judge was going to hear the testimony of Gypsy, who was 6 at the time. They'd been in our home for several years, and we finally got to court. The judge held the hearing in his chambers, away from any crowd that might be in the courtroom, to make it easier for Gypsy to speak freely about what happened to her. However, the court-appointed attorney for the father, who was also running for political office and needed a court victory, came into the room a few minutes after the hearing started. When he came in, he was yelling at the top of his lungs to his secretary about another case he was involved with. Well, it was obvious to all, since you could not treat a 6-year-old as a hostile witness, he came into the room angry and loud to try to intimidate Gypsy and to keep her from speaking. Was that fair? When we went to the courtroom, that same attorney argued, since the biological father hadn't done anything to the girls for over a year, they should be returned home. That wasn't fair, because he left out the fact the father had been in jail for the last year and had no contact with the girls. At the end of the hearing, the judge had no choice but to return the girls to their parents. Where was the justice in that? How was that fair? Now, you know, all of us have stories like that, don't we? Stories where life has treated you unfair. If we would open up the floor this morning and allow everyone to share the time or the times in your lives when life was unfair, we would be here all day. So rather than that, let's instead look this morning at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 16, through chapter 4, verse 16. In this text, we will see that Solomon discovered 6 things in this life that are unfair. These 6 things are universal, and they happen to everyone. And the question we need to answer is, if life is unfair, can we do anything in this world to make it fair? To make it a little better? Well, the first thing we see in our text is that justice is not fair. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. You know, people have been getting away with injustice for years. They believe that God's justice will never prevail if they even bother to consider the subject at all. It seems as if justice is not fair, and often in this world we suffer through poor judgment and injustice. Secondly, we see that death is not fair. Death is the ultimate in unfairness, especially to those of us left behind. Solomon's word in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 18 through 22 are very disturbing, actually. He wrote, I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Man's fate is like that of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward, and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So I saw that there was nothing better for a man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? What in the world is Solomon saying here? At first glance, it might appear that he's saying there's nothing beyond this life. So you might as well eat, drink, and be merry. Solomon is actually echoing the conclusion many today have come to. He's not dealing with our eternal state here, but with our earthly state. Animals die, and so do we. He's showing the folly of living without God. We have a remembered history. We have advanced communication skills, the ability to create, and yet we, though we think we're so important, are just like the animals, and we die. So if we think this world is all we have, that it's all meaningless, a chasing after the wind, we'd be right. Now, as Christians, we know the answer to the question about what happens after we die. But the unfairness of death, both the random nature and the inescapable truth, still exists. And it's still unfair. Next, Solomon tells us oppression is not fair. Oppression is not fair. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Again I looked and saw oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of their oppressors, and they have no comforter. I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. What's worse than death? Sometimes is to continue to live. Psalm 74 says, "For the dark places of the earth are full of the habitations of cruelty." The oppression and cruelty in this world is overwhelming. People are bound by addiction, whether drugs or alcohol or something else. Child abuse is destroying the next generation. And in spite of attempts to downplay it by saying that there's always been violence, the truth is it's running rampant today. From the persecution of Christians by groups like ISIS, to gang violence from groups like MS-13, to dysfunctional families, and it's all unfair. Fourth, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 4 through 6 reminds us that wealth is not fair. And I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. You see, our problem today is not the high cost of living, but of living high. On the one hand, money cannot buy us happiness, but the lack of money leaves us miserable. It's unfair. The fifth unfair thing on that list is found in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 7 through 12, which tells us relationships are not fair. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls, and he has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Now Solomon, maybe he's getting tired of being so negative, because here Solomon is foreshadowing the solution to life being unfair. The third strand in the relationship is what makes relationships work. Because you see, even though maybe a relationship would be something good, how unfair is it all? How unfair when it falls apart? How unfair when all we work for is taken away and then gone? It's unfair. The sixth and last thing on Solomon's list is growing old. Growing old is not fair. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Better a poor wise youth than an old but foolish king, who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within the kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before him, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, chasing after the wind. You know, one of the worst feelings in the world is to feel irrelevant and useless. How hard it is when the world passes us by. Just when we begin to figure things out, just when we understand how things work, suddenly we're no longer needed, no longer wanted. Even if we worked hard and contributed a lot, it's unfair when we're forgotten, ignored, and dismissed as old news. So why did Solomon spend so much time in this book telling us all this depressing stuff and hammering home how meaningless everything in this world is? Life is not fair. Now, most of us recognize the injustice and try to make the best of things. On good days, we can live with that, but on bad days, knowing life is unfair can crush our spirit. However, there is one thing in spite of all the gloom and doom of this world that is fair. The only thing fair is God. He may not miraculously or immediately make everything right in your life, but He has promised to never leave us. He may not ease the pain and suffering that we're experiencing, but He has promised to be here for us. He may not give you great health and wealth under the sun in this world, but He has given you salvation and eternal life. Jumping ahead again to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13, the conclusion Solomon comes to. Now, all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of mankind. Now, I'll deal with this verse in depth next Sunday. But for now, we just need to understand the only thing that matters is to fear God and keep His commandments. Since everything in this world is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, and since life is unfair anyway, we should hold loosely to the things of this world. All the things of this world will pass away. They'll disappear. Only God matters. You see, that's why we fear Him. Not because we're afraid of His terrible swift justice. Fear here has the idea of respect, honor, and reverence. And we respect, honor, and have reverence to God by keeping His commandments. So that leads to the most important question. What are His commandments? What do we do to please the only one who matters? In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus was approached and asked what the greatest commandment of all was. The idea behind the question was if we knew what was the most important commandment, everything else will fall under that. If we could understand and do the most important thing, then we'd be able to understand and do everything else. Jesus answered in Luke chapter 10, verse 27. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus quotes two Old Testament scriptures to make his point. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and Leviticus chapter 19. These two commands go hand in glove because you cannot love God and hate your neighbor. 1 John chapter 4 verse 20 reminds us, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And exactly how are we to love our neighbor? We are to love our neighbor, Jesus says, as ourselves. Now, think about what that means. We're going to take care of ourselves, right? We're going to make sure that we have food to eat, that we have a place to live, that we have clothes on our back. We love ourselves, so we will do nice things for ourselves, like maybe buy ourselves a treat, or go to a movie or a play, or maybe get something nice for ourselves, like a car or other toys that we might like. That's how we love ourselves. And that's how we treat others. We treat others that way, not because we want something in return, or because being good is the way to get to heaven. We love others because life is unfair. And by doing something nice to someone else, we can make life a little less unfair. What good thing can you do for someone this week? What can you do to love them? It may not change the world by what you do. It may not even change the town, our town. But it will bring hope to someone who is struggling with the meaningless nature of life in this world, and who may be drowning in the unfairness of it all. So that's the challenge. Do something this week to someone else that you would like done to you. Sometimes we can become bitter and closed off because everything is so unfair. And the reason, of course, we become so cynical is because we always seem to get the short end of the stick, don't we? We all long for fairness. We all want justice. We want the wicked to suffer and the righteous rewarded. However, this attitude, which is very natural and very common, is not what we really want or need. You see, we don't really want justice. We don't really want fairness when it comes to God. Instead, justice and fairness, God offers us grace instead. And grace is not fair. Because we all should be condemned. We're all doomed. We all fallen short of the glory of God. But grace has forgiven us. Grace has forgiven us, and His grace has also forgiven that person down the way who's a little worse than we are. The truth is, we do not deserve the salvation God has offered us. No one does. We are all sinners. We all fall short of a standard. We can't even follow the basic command to love our neighbor. The reason the book of Ecclesiastes is so important is because this book pulls back the curtain on our misunderstanding, our denial of life and the world, and shows us we cannot save ourselves, because that's all striving after the wind. We do ourselves and everyone else a big disservice when we put on rose-colored glasses and act as if everything is great. Now, maybe we are doing pretty good by whatever standard you've decided is good, but it never lasts. Maybe we can bury our heads in the sand and pretend that things are not all that bad, but that doesn't change the truth. The Bible confirms what so many in the world desperately want to believe. There is life after this life. Jesus rose from the dead, and the Bible claims He is the only way to eternal life. Could it be that everything in this life is not all meaningless? Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 22, in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will all be changed. Life is not fair, but God gives us grace.